15 million people in the last 21 days have lost their jobs, and that's probably an understatement. That's just the people who have new unemployment filings. And I know for me personally, this is an emotional thing. I've spent my whole life, literally probably the last 25 years, practicing and studying best hiring recruiting practices, and been an advocate for employers on how to help build the best teams they possibly can. And it's heartbreaking for me to see so many people have lost their jobs, and so many companies having a tough time here. So this presentation was kind of out of a passion for that, and seeing so many people affected. We wanted to just find some way that we could give back to others, and just share some thoughts on how to help these people who have ultimately lost their jobs, and personally have revised my personal and corporate mission and vision statement to help America get back to work ASAP. So it's kind of a new passion in this new era. So I am Fletcher Wimbush. I own two companies. One is SaaS recruiting, assessment, talent assessment. So personality, cognitive, skill-based testing business. The other business is a professional search business that's also offering outplacement services. I've spent my lifetime studying and practicing best hiring practices, have written prolifically for SHRM, HRCI, Inc., Forbes, presentations, Monster, Recruiter.com, ERE. So just shared a ton of content in that space across lots and lots of different platforms. My father wrote a book, which I helped updated after his passing about 7 years ago, kind of modernize that. And that's all about how to get the right people on your team. And I'm also really, really happy to have Iris Kristoff here. She's an employment attorney. And I'll let Iris, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your firm and your background?
Sure. As Fletcher mentioned, I'm an employment attorney. I work at Duns, DeSantis, Walton, Kendrick in downtown San Diego. I've been on both sides of the employment arena. So I previously represented employees with respect to employment claims. And now my practice is focused on representing employers. And I've been focusing very heavily on workplace guidance in light of the coronavirus pandemic. I also have a master's in public health, and I worked and interned and did a postgraduate fellowship at the CDC. So got both sides. I've got the public health side as well as the employment legal side of things. So don't hesitate today, while Fletcher's speaking, while I'm speaking, to send in your questions on the chat function. That's the best part of these webinars, is that we can respond to your questions during the webinar. So no question is one that I won't answer. I'll try my best to answer whatever I can.
Yeah, awesome. Wow. Yeah, Iris is a very strong background and well suited for this situation. And so she's an awesome resource, and we're really, really glad to have you on this webinar with us. So looking forward to learning a lot from you today. Deciding to have to lay off your employees or furlough, for me, when I faced this potential decision in my own business, was the most heart-wrenching and painful thought I could ever have. I mean, I was almost devastated. I can only imagine. I have so many friends who are entrepreneurs that have had to do this, and I understand the pain that they feel for their people. Their people is just overwhelming. So, we're going to talk about this, and there's also a business side, and there's also that human side. So I'm trying to bring those two together and just get people as well prepared as possible. So as I mentioned, my mission and our mission is to get America back to work, and we're committed to that. So we'll start. A lot of people that we've talked to, really, There's obviously a huge financial aspect of this. So we're going to run through some of the major financial aspects. So obviously deciding to furlough and lay off is to stem the bleeding just from the most immediate situation, but there are a lot of hidden costs associated with this that Iris and I will talk about how to mitigate some of these. So these are the things that we're not thinking about right now, right? So litigation costs, as Iris knows very well, could be enormous. There's different numbers, somewhere between $150,000 and $250,000 per litigated employment claim, and that claim could be for a variety of employment issues. There's a 10% chance that any terminated employee could litigate for any number of reasons. And in California, that's a 50% higher chance. So it's like between a 1 and 2 out of every person who's laid off or fired or terminated. Doesn't matter what the reason is for. There's a 1 or 2 of those people are likely to litigate. So that could be an enormous business crushing cost if we don't do it the right way. Obviously, the most basic thing is if you're going to continue operations, your unemployment insurance costs are going to go up. So the faster we can get people back to work, the less of an impact that's going to have on your unemployment insurance costs. So there's some numbers here. The numbers are just flat out staggering. This is even just in small groups of people. Your costs just can be enormous. One of the even more hidden costs is an unwanted or unexpected turnover. If it's not handled the right way, and Iris is going to talk to us about the bird situation, and we'll only know what happens with bird here soon enough. But if it's not handled the right way, you increase the chances of unwanted turnover by 31%. Current turnover rates is actually more about 22% to the latest Bureau of Labor Statistics numbers. So on average, companies turn over 22% of their workforce. This could increase by up to 31% by having to have a large-scale workforce reduction. And that obviously is going to be on the high end if it's not done right. So per 100 employees, you may be looking at a few $1 million in potential additional costs that could come back. And I don't know, what's the statute of limitations? I think, Iris, like 3 years, you'd be talking about these costs potentially, right? So before we think about layoffs and downsizing, I always think we should at least think about the things that we can do to potentially prevent that from happening. What's our alternatives? There's an entrepreneur up in Seattle. They do payment processing. He's the guy on Inc., drawing a blank now on his name, but he's the guy that did the minimum $70,000 wage for all his employees. He's got like almost 150 employees. And in this downturn, he did a cool thing, and he went to everybody and he said, let's everybody put down what number they could afford to give up. And the entire workforce all put down a number and said, I could live off of 40,000, 60,000, 10,000, whatever it was. And when they put all those numbers together, they were able to get under the number that they needed in order to save their entire workforce for 6 months. So I thought that was a pretty cool story I just saw recently. A little off topic, but I know a scenario that Iris and I were just talking about. The client just furloughed like hundreds of employees. I have a friend who was in this situation, furloughed 3,000 employees in the hospitality business. And one of the things that my friend did was he continued to pay their health insurance premiums, including the employees' contribution. So they paid nothing out of pocket for the next 3 months. And not all those people are going to go back to work for him, but at minimum, he gave them some sort of basic security net that they needed. We talked about the temporary and partial pay reductions, that example of asking everybody to pick their own number. Other examples that I've seen are where people, based on the tier of employee, the lowest paid people got the smallest reduction, and the highest paid people got the biggest. In smaller companies, there might be an opportunity to offer ownership or equity to some of your top people in exchange for pay. So this could be a great way to retain top producers within your organization by offering that. And some other more creative ways could be loaning your workforce to another business. Another even option or alternative to this is just create opportunities for them. So another example is a friend laid off a lot of people. He basically created his own job board. He went to all the grocery stores and Walmarts and drugstores and delivery companies and said, hey, I've got a bunch of people who's laid off that could be good fits for these roles. He had a workforce that could easily transfer to these positions. And then he put together sort of a list of places where you could go apply and get another job. So, or there's another ways maybe to just temporarily loan. Manufacturing is a great sector for that, or healthcare is a great sector. So there's a lot of, the non-necessary medical stuff, you could easily loan that workforce to the frontline people out there. So, these are all options. Then, we definitely would want to make sure that you're thinking about them or considering them. I know they're not the best options always, but if anything we can do is really important. So once we've considered the potential costs, the hidden costs that we're not looking at right away, and we thoroughly understand those, and then we've considered what we can do to prevent layoffs, most of us are thinking about what are the legal considerations that we should be thinking about. So, really, really happy to have you here, Iris. Talk to us about some of these legal considerations and some of the cost saving strategies that people are thinking about.
Sure. So I know with my clients, the number one topic of discussion right now is how can we reduce our labor costs during this time? There's so much uncertainty. A lot of my clients' businesses are closed temporarily, especially with Governor Newsom's stay-at-home order, which is requiring all non-essential businesses to either provide remote work to their employees or to just close down. And so with respect to whether your business is an essential business, there's tons of great guidance online from the governor's office. So I would really suggest, if you haven't taken a look at that yet, you should be looking at it. We do not want workers to be physically reporting to work unless it's absolutely necessary, unless you are operating an essential business. And even if you have an essential business, you really need to be mindful and do an analysis of whether a certain service that you're providing is essential, because your business might provide certain essential services. That doesn't mean that every service is essential. So that means that you need to do an analysis of every service and worker and make sure that you're not requiring people to report to work that shouldn't be reporting to work. I don't know if some people may have heard in the news that LA is taking a really strict approach to this. And I think they were shutting off power and water to certain businesses that refused to shut down. So hopefully, we're paying close attention to these orders coming down from the governor's office, because it's crucial. The baseline for employers is that there is a requirement to provide a safe and healthy workplace. So to do that, you've got to be following the public health orders for your county. San Diego County has quite a few orders that employers should be paying attention to. They've got a stay-at-home order from the state, and now there's guidance saying that workers who come into contact with the public, like at grocery stores, they've got to be wearing face masks. So there's a lot to be keeping an eye on. You should be subscribing to legal updates, or you should have an employment attorney or legal counsel that should be sending you some updates that apply to your business. I tell all my clients, I'm looking out for certain issues for them. And as soon as the guidance is released, I always send it to them. So that's what you should be asking from your employment attorney right now. Keep my business in mind. Let me know if there's any changes that I need to know about, and a good employment attorney will do that for you. And so with respect to these cost saving options, There's no one size fits all. Every business is in a different position and they're going to weather the storm differently. So these are just some considerations, and you can kind of mix and match as needed. What I usually tell my clients is let's start with a furlough if at all possible, because the furloughs will help us try to reduce some of your labor costs and give you some time before you have to take some of those more drastic options like a layoff. So with an employee furlough, what you're doing is basically it's a mandatory unpaid, typically unpaid leave of absence. You can offer to pay your employees. It's a really nice offering to do that. Sometimes my clients will offer to pay employees through a certain date, and then the furlough continues unpaid. But it's not required to provide pay during the furlough. But during the furlough, you would usually keep an employee's health benefits going. Your health plan is going to have limits on how long you can keep those furloughed employees basically covered. So you're going to need to look at your actual plan document or contact your health plan administrator to figure out, how long can I continue offering health benefits to these employees if they're not performing work right now. And but you should be offering and keeping those furloughed employees. They should continue to have those health benefits. And also with your furloughed employees, you want to communicate with them in writing. You want to notify them of the furlough, the duration of the furlough, and when you expect these employees to return to work. The most important thing with an employee furlough is that you're communicating a return to work date. If you leave it open-ended, you're setting yourself up for some major wage and hour issues, because the labor commissioner has issued guidance in the past telling us if furlough is open-ended, you're going to trigger final pay requirements, meaning you need to pay out your final pay, including any accrued but unused vacation time. You're not paying out sick leave time. You're going to need to make sure you've got expense reimbursements, COBRA notices, a change in relationship form. So we want to make sure that when we're starting with an employee furlough, that we're not leaving it completely open-ended. You want to communicate to these employees, you are still an employee here, meaning I'm not going to be paying out your final pay because you're still employed, your health and benefits are still going, and we're giving you an anticipated return to work date. So that's why all those strategies are there.
Can you adjust that date?
You can always adjust that date. And that's my other piece of advice. We're going to add in the legal language saying this date is subject to change at the company's sole discretion. So you give yourself that flexibility. There's other wage and hour issues that will come up if you extend the furlough, but I like to see initial furloughs taken in 2 to 3 week long increments. If you absolutely know I'm not going to be bringing these people back, it's better to make the decision. And if you're going to need to do a layoff, then you should consider doing that layoff, because we don't want to be making promises to people that we can't keep. We want to communicate honestly with our workers. Don't set up false expectations. But if there is a possibility that you could be bringing people back, then don't just go straight to a layoff, because people might start looking for new jobs. And then, this pandemic is going to end. So we need to figure out for our businesses, how are we going to restart? And the costs associated with training a whole new workforce are huge. So if there's any way to minimize or to avoid a layoff, I would suggest starting with a furlough. And then in terms of a layoff is basically like a termination. It's like a no-fault termination. And the worker does not have any expectation of returning to work. So it triggers those final pay requirements, meaning you're going to pay out the final paycheck, the expenses. You're going to give them a notice of change in relationship form. You're going to tell them to apply for unemployment benefits. And then during a furlough, same thing. These employees are likely going to qualify for EDD benefits. And with furloughs and layoffs, the biggest piece of advice I can give to you is California anti-discrimination and anti-retaliation laws still apply. So you got to make sure that you're selecting workers who are going to be furloughed or laid off in a non-discriminatory manner. We don't want to bring back a certain selection of workers who are all of the same race or gender. We want to make sure that we're bringing, we're making selections not based on, unlawful categories. So be really careful, because one of the recent laws that was passed in 2020 is an extension of the Fair Employment and Housing Act statute of limitations. So now it went from a 1-year statute of limitations to file the lawsuit, and now there's a 3-year statute of limitations to file the DFEH complaint, and then you've got 1 year from filing that complaint to file the lawsuit. So it's basically a 4-year waiting time before we might see any lawsuits against a business. So just be aware of that. Just because you haven't, a lawsuit hasn't appeared just yet, it doesn't mean that one couldn't come up down the road. So we want to make sure that we're treating our workers fairly, and again, communicating with them as much as possible, but still using legal strategies to give ourselves flexibility and to change things as needed, especially during a pandemic. And then another strategy for reducing labor costs is a reduction in hours. Reduction in hours is really only going to be helpful for your hourly non-exempt employees, meaning those employees that are only being paid for the work that they actually perform. For salaried employees, it's way more difficult, because if a salaried employee performs even 1 hour or 1 minute of work in a work week, you're on the hook for the entire week's salary. So just be really mindful of that. A reduction in hours is not going to help you with your salaried employees. So we have to look at the makeup of your workforce. If your workforce is mainly hourly employees, we're going to use different strategies than we would if your workforce was mainly salaried exempt employees. So it's really crucial to be communicating with your employment attorney at this time, whenever you're making any of these decisions, and figuring out, is this a strategy that's even going to give me any cost savings? Because there's a lot of considerations, especially in California employers. I mean, we have so many laws to deal with. We're in a unique position though, because I always say my California employers, they are in the best position to weather this storm. They're already aware of all the wage and hour issues that can arise. And with the new FFCRA, the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, the sick leave, and the expanded FMLA, we're in a way better position than the rest of the country to address those laws. So hang in there. You've been doing it for this long. You can handle these new laws, and you can handle these, the issues that could come up with layoffs and furloughs. So don't be intimidated. Just consult with legal counsel and subscribe to legal updates is my biggest piece of advice. Okay. So, and then there's also salary reductions, and that's going to be helpful for your salaried employees. You've got to pay them at least 2 times minimum wage. So keep that in mind. We can't be reducing salaries to, nothing. So, but if someone's making, say, 100K plus, we can reduce them down to the 54,000, which is the 2 times minimum wage. That could be a huge reduction, and it's temporary. I mean, we also don't want to turn off employees. We don't want to take our high earners and bring them down to the baseline. But what I've had clients do is say, hey, we're going to bring everybody to this level. It's temporary, and then we'll bring you back up when we're in a financial position to do so. So there's strategies that you can use to retain your really valuable people. So think about that.
Yeah, those are good tips. Yeah.
I did want to chat a little bit about how Bird, who has the electronic scooters, I love those scooters. Unfortunately, Bird had some difficult decisions to make. They were doing a mass layoff, and it's challenging. Their workers were working remotely. So how do you do a mass layoff when workers cannot physically report to an office? So what they decided to do was basically send out a Zoom webinar invite to their employees that showed up on the employees' calendars. And basically the reasoning for the webinar was just a COVID-19 update. And most employees thought, okay, this is going to be about, just how the business is responding, an update. And what it ended up being was a mass layoff that was done by, I believe it was just a random person who had really no affiliation with the company. I don't believe the employees recognized this person. It was very impersonal. And obviously employees were completely blindsided and really upset. And I think the public hearing about that and how it was handled, it's been not the best publicity for Bird. So I'm just using that situation as kind of like a case study for what can be done, and what should we be thinking about, and what kind of messages do we want to send to our employees. So let's go to the next slide, and these are some questions that were raised that came to mind for me when I read some of the articles about the bird layoffs, which is, when you're doing a mass layoff via a webinar where other employees can see who was invited to that webinar and basically can find out who's been terminated. I mean, that's just sends such a terrible message to those former employees and to your current employees. Because as a current employee, I would be terrified. I would never want to attend a Zoom webinar ever again for work. So you don't want to have a culture of fear. You want to do these layoffs or furloughs in a way that is respectful to your employees. We're all human beings and we're all deserving of that basic respect, especially in the workplace. So keep that in mind. And then the impact of the bird brand. I mean, I think a lot of people were pretty put off and turned off by the way that they handled the layoffs. So it doesn't just affect your employees, it can even affect your brand. And then how do we handle these types of layoffs or furloughs during a pandemic when we've got these remote workers, especially when there's so many wage and hour issues that can arise? We got PAGA claims, PAGA litigation, basically where we've got employees who suffer even just one wage and hour violation. They can go and basically assert wage and hour violations on behalf of any other employee, even if they didn't personally experience that wage and hour violation. It's huge liability. I can't even emphasize it enough. So if you don't pay out those final paychecks on the day of termination for those layoffs, you are in some really hot water, especially with these PAGA claims. So, and then there's WARN Act notifications. So the California has its own, what they call mini WARN Act. There's a federal WARN Act that's a little bit broader. It only covers employers that have 100 or more employees. The California WARN Act, it's going to cover employers that have at least 75 employees and who are laying off 50 or more of those employees. So if you fall into that category, you should be calling your attorney if you're considering furloughs or layoffs, because case law says the California WARN Act applies to those furlough situations. So be mindful. So I think the next slide probably talks about, let's see, I think we've already kind of addressed these issues about is your business even operational right now? So let's assume your business is operational and you're considering some mass layoffs or furloughs. So we'll go to the next slide and we'll talk about, let's see, I think we've addressed some of this too. These are big picture items. I'll get to the WARN Act in a minute. That's going to be a little bit more boring. I mean, that's some technical legal stuff, but you can go back to the last slide. So technology is your friend up to a certain point. I really think and feel strongly that the managers of the teams should be handling the layoff or furloughs if at all possible. It just depends on the size of your workforce. So with respect to the bird situation, rather than inviting, I think it was like 400 employees to one webinar, try to break it up by teams if at all possible. It gives a little bit more of a personal touch. And then it also gives your employees an opportunity to ask questions. Even if you're doing a furlough situation, employees are going to have questions. So you need to be prepared. You can't just kind of shove a piece of paper at them and say, okay, we'll see you in 3 to 4 weeks. People need a point of contact. And honestly, you've got a legal obligation to provide a point of contact under the WARN Act. So if you can give them, a brief opportunity to ask some questions, or at least give them the contact information for who they can follow up if they need to talk about anything. That's key, because in the moment, people are going to be absorbing the information and they might not have questions right away, but you want to give them that chance. It's going to minimize and reduce chances of, employment litigation. And it's going to reduce wage and hour issues, because someone might bring up something, hey, I didn't get paid for this, I need to be reimbursed for that. You want to communicate with your employees. There is no harm in communicating with employees, and do it in writing if at all possible. Okay, I think we can go on to the next one. Checklist for employee terminations. I think we've gone through this quite a bit. Final paycheck, all your accrued vacation time, expense reimbursement, do the COBRA notice from your plan administrator. And then for the WARN Act, Governor Newsom did send out another executive order saying he was loosening up the WARN Act requirements, but there's still quite a few requirements that still apply. I mean, this is really technical legal stuff, so I don't expect everyone to want to digest this.
Can you give us an overview of the WARN Act? What kind of things you have to do? Yeah.
So the WARN Act basically just says you need to give your employees certain notifications. If we weren't in a pandemic situation, normally if you were going to do a mass layoff, meaning you're employing 75 or more full-time and part-time employees at any time in the last 12 months, the WARN Act is going to apply to you if you're considering a furlough or a layoff that affects 50 or more of your employees. So if you only are furloughing or laying off 49 or less employees, don't worry about the WARN Act. But if you're doing more than that, you need to be worrying about it, because you have to send notifications to your employees in writing. There is certain legal language that has to be included. Governor Newsom gave us guidelines for what language has to be included. You have to notify your employees of their eligibility for EDD. You have to notify EDD that you're even doing this. You have to notify a workforce development board, and you have to notify certain elected officials. So it's really, really crucial to use legal counsel to help you through this, because it's not something that I would recommend doing on your own, just because the amount of wage and hour issues that can result from violations of the WARN Act are enormous. So
these notifications are the hard part. Yeah. So, make sure you, Okay, good.
And then we have a brand new law. On top of all this, we've got a brand new federal law, the FFCRA, the FCRA law. So it's recently enacted. It's in effect right now, went into effect on April 1st. We're in a non-enforcement period, but you still have to make reasonable efforts to comply. The non-enforcement period continues until April 17th, and then we're in the enforcement period. So your HR person should be ready and raring to go. If you haven't already gotten some requests for the sick leave yet, or the expanded FMLA, get ready, because I foresee it. A lot of my clients are coming to me right now and saying, I'm starting to get sick leave requests. What kind of documentation do I need to get? The great part about the FFCRA is you're giving sick leave, but you're going to get a tax credit reimbursement from the federal government, a dollar for dollar tax credit reimbursement. A lot of my clients are saying, wait, what if people are going to be abusing this? I think right now, during a pandemic situation where there's no businesses open, there's nowhere where you really want to go to travel, I don't foresee employees abusing this. There's nowhere fun to go. So if your employee can do remote work at home, you should be offering them remote work. If they can't do remote work and they have a qualifying reason, you should be giving them the leave and seeking the tax credit reimbursement from the federal government. And to get that tax credit, you've got to have certain documentation. If anybody has questions about documentation, I'm happy to talk offline about that. There's so much I could talk about with the FFCRA. We don't have time to.
One thing, Iris, that I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, my understanding is with this FFCRA is it could be as simple as their kid is home from school and they need to homeschool them and they're eligible for this.
So in the event of a school closure due to coronavirus-related precautions, if you need to be providing care for your child and that means that you are unable to work, then you may be eligible for the sick leave component and the expanded FMLA component. But if your employer is willing to offer you some remote work or the intermittent leave, meaning after your kid goes to bed, you could do some work, then you're not going to, fully qualify. You would only be able to qualify for the leave during the times that you're unable to work because you're caring for your kid. So there are limitations on it. It's not completely open-ended. And I think that's a pretty big misconception, is that we've got a stay-at-home order, there's school closures, I'm automatically eligible. It doesn't really work like that. It's actually a pretty tight defined law. So employers shouldn't be afraid. They just need to know the circumstances when an employee would be eligible, because if you offer that leave and then you try to go and get reimbursement and the employee wasn't qualified for it, you're not going to get reimbursement. So that money's going to come out of your pocket. So you should be consulting with legal counsel. All my clients call me the second someone requests a leave to verify that they're going to get that tax credit reimbursement. So we go through the eligibility issues. So if you have legal counsel, you should be contacting them about that. Alrighty, so I've got one question I want to answer, and let me take a look at it. So with respect to newly eligible benefits whose hours are reduced, do we still allow new enrollments? So I'm assuming, Sarah, that this question is about a reduction in hours for employees and whether they would qualify for benefits. So, whatever your normal employee benefit qualifications are, they're just going to continue to apply. If an employee is basically being reduced to a part-time employee, you would look at what are the eligibility requirements that would normally apply for the part-time employee and go from there. And then once they transition back to a full-time employee, if they do, then you would allow them to have those, full-time benefits. But then, the biggest piece of all this is that you should be planning and preparing in advance. These are not the types of decisions that you make overnight. You would contact legal counsel, and then you're going to communicate with your employees about this. And then, Fletcher, I'm going to let you take it away.
Yeah. And so that's kind of the first phase that we like to talk about. And so we've talked about all of these hidden costs, and Iris, you really, hit it again and help, people understand there's a lot of costs that can hit you up to 4 years after this happens. So I'm very concerned about that and how that's going to affect businesses down the road, because we're not thinking about these things right now. So, to your point, the first step in this is creating a really solid strategy, right? And any solid strategy begins by having a clearly defined set of outcomes. And those outcomes are going to be partially financial. So obviously we're doing this because we can't afford to have these workers on staff. We can't afford their pay for the time being if they're furloughed, or for the foreseeable future if we have to lay them off. That's one outcome that you want to define, but also thinking about the risks down the road. How am I going to deal with those, and what kind of outcomes I want to see there? And then more importantly, the one that was totally missed by Bird, because I'm sure that they did not mean to seem insensitive towards their workforce, but how do you want your people to feel, right? And I'd say, 99% of all of leaders, C-suite, HR people, they want this to be as humane and compassionate as possible. They want people to feel good about them as an employer and how they were treated and how this happened. And but you need to define that, and then you also need to measure it. And when we're talking about a feeling or a sentiment, we got to be proactive in measuring what that sentiment is that we're hoping for, our approach, our plan to help people feel that way, feel cared about, for example, and think about all the different actions that we're going to take, and whether or not those things are going to, we think that those things are going to create the desired outcome. So I just can't stress that part of it enough in this crisis mode, where so many people have had to do things overnight, snap of the fingers. But those of us who are still thinking about it, we have time. And if we're in HR, we should be talking to our leadership about that. If we're in leadership, we should be talking to our HR and our other leadership team, and we should be coming up with essentially a SMART plan. So a specific, measurable, actionable, realistic, and time-bound plan. And then everybody who's going to be involved will also have their own SMART plan under that. So we're not tripping over ourselves, trying to do the same thing, or solve different problems, because as we've already highlighted, there's a bunch of different considerations. And if we have a large workforce, it's not going to be feasible for just one or two people to execute this plan, right? So having the outcome, having the plan, having a plan for each person involved is going to be really, really important. What we're looking at from an outplacement standpoint, again, this is kind of goes back to the Bird thing. Look, you don't want to have a stranger do this. Make it as personable as possible, and be prepared. And ideally, if your goal is to show people that you're compassionate and you care about them and you want to do everything possible, aside from, maybe some severances or extending maybe health benefits for a period of time, or doing some things like that, but also making sure that they're getting paid on time. That's both a legal thing, but it's also a compassionate thing. But connecting them with a resource. So either internally, if you designate captains, maybe they're team leaders or managers or HR people, or if you hire an outplacement firm like what we do, connect them immediately and let them know, help them understand that these benefits are there. And those people can be those liaisons, the people who can help execute that strategy to make sure that your people feel the way you hope that they wanted to be feel and be treated. So the next phase of that is everybody. I don't know if you can just put yourself in the shoes of, maybe this has happened to you. If you suddenly lose a job, this is an emotionally trying and stressful situation, and everybody's going to have a different situation. So ideally, we want to have somebody there to support them, to create a game plan for their own unique needs. And that game plan primarily is going to be focused on getting them back up on their feet. And getting back on your feet is going to be, again, different for everybody. But there's going to be things like, immediately get that unemployment. There are some great benefits out there with the federal supplement that's going on. Make sure that get your taxes done, or defer those tax payments. If you're getting a refund, then get those taxes filed, get the refund. It also will get you streamlined to get that $1,200 payment from the government. If you owe money and you can't pay it right away, then get your taxes done so that you can plan for that expense and defer it with some of the new rules that are coming out. Look at rent and mortgage deferment. start looking at ways to understand your personal finances. And again, not everybody in our workforce is maybe sophisticated enough to do this without any help. And even the ones that are, even me, I mean, if this happened to me, I'd really have to sit down, and I already am, even, having to look at my own personal financial situation and carefully go through and understand what's going on. And that's a difficult situation. So having somebody to help coach you through that and providing some tools and resources for people to figure that out is super, super important. And making sure that they have options for their key necessities: healthcare, food, social services, mental health, things like that. The next piece is, once we can get people up on their feet, then we can start thinking about how to get them back to work. And those are things like resume writing. Iris attorneys might look at this different ways, but I would be offering letters of recommendations. The only thing illegal about a reference is doing one that's discriminatory. So if you discriminate in how you provide references and who and what you say about certain people, then that's the only thing that's going to create potential risk for you. So if you are, equally fair in how you provide those recommendations, that's really going to go a long ways to helping them get a job, helping them get their LinkedIn profile set up, assessments to understand themselves and where they can best position themselves for the future, creating a personal mission and vision statement. This is something I did after divorce, maybe it was about 9 years ago or something now, and it was life-changing for me personally. Helping them through these processes of strategically creating a smart plan to get a job. And that's also the last piece of this. So once we've got on our feet, we've gotten prepared to get the job, now we need a smart plan that can execute. So you as an employer can help them with these things on our website. All of these tools are free and available. I just can't encourage people to do it enough. There's also a great site called onwardca.org, I believe. And they also provide a lot of these resources. So that's another great thing you can do. Partnering, like she said, if you're laying off over 50 people, you have to notify workforce development programs, and you can get free skill development. So everything from leadership to accounting and 1,000 other topics in between. So that can be a great thing to keep people busy while they're working on getting another job, keep them sharpening their skill set. So, a couple key features on our outplacement services is we have dedicated career counselors. So people spend it's a 4-week process, and then it never ends. So it's 4 weeks of structured process where they have the same career counselor, and after that they have unlimited support in an unstructured fashion. Then we're doing twice weekly peer-led groups. So we're talking about any one of these topics and just coaching them through how to write a resume or how to create a personal financial situation or a mission statement. And that's coach-led in a group setting. So in addition to the one-on-one personal attention they get from the same person the entire time they're looking for a job. And then we also have a private Facebook group for peer-to-peer sharing, and also the coaches are adding great insights in there as well. And then we talked about creating that smart plan and the desired effect. But this employee satisfaction survey, so measuring the outcome, whatever it is you want to measure, that's a big piece of it. You can do this on your own, or hopefully your outplacement service provider can help you with that as well. As if you work with us, I would, it's mandatory that we measure the outcome, in my opinion. So, and then creating targeted job opportunities for your workforces. So in some cases, there might be bulk job opportunities for your particular workforce. So I know Iris has raving fans. We have hundreds of raving fans in our different businesses, and it all comes down to great service level. And so, we're running a little bit out of time, but, ultimately, we are here and available. And if you want to have a one-on-one with anybody on my team, or I know Iris has offered to spend time, we're happy to do a free consultation one-on-one with anybody who's interested in learning more on how to do this and not be the bird of the world, right? And, I know Iris is happy to chat through some of the legal pitfalls and sort you through there. Anything else you want to add, Iris?
No, but don't hesitate to reach out. I'm always available. I'm working through these issues with my clients on a day-to-day basis. So I'm happy to help anyone that has any questions. Let's see, working remote. Yeah, that's a big one right now. Is it a risk to have a virtual break room to interact? Well, if the virtual break room is voluntary and there's no obligation that they log in a certain number of times, you just can't require usage of the break room. Otherwise, you're setting yourself up for wage and hour claim, and that you should be paying employees for their time spent in the break room. But no, if it's a totally voluntary piece that you're using for your employees to boost morale, I think that's great. Just don't have any obligations to sign in or log in or anything. That should be okay.
Any other questions in there?
If anyone has any other questions, I think we're going to send out our contact information and just reach out.
Awesome. Well, Iris, I learned so much from you today, and it was really a great pleasure. And I got to run to my next thing, and I know most of us do. So, hey, I look forward to the recording, everybody, and thank you very much for joining us.
See you guys.
Yeah.